I'm a 27-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. Growing up in a family of 5, it was clear from an early age where I stood. My parents favored my older sister 30 and younger brother 25 in ways that were impossible to ignore. I was the responsible one, the independent one, which as I later realized was just a polite way of saying I was the one they didn't care to support. My childhood was full of little reminders that I didn't matter as much. My sister was praised for the smallest accomplishments, she barely passed a course in college, and my parents threw her a huge party. When I graduated with honors, my parents shrugged it off like it was no big deal. They didn't even show up for the ceremony. It wasn't just about the celebrations, though. It was everything. My sister was fragile, my brother was sensitive, and I was just expected to deal with everything on my own. The financial inequality was one of the hardest parts. My sister got help buying a car, my brother had his tuition paid for, and they both went on family-funded vacations. Meanwhile, I was told I needed to learn to be independent. When I asked for help with medical bills after a surgery I couldn't afford, they told me they were saving for emergencies. That emergency turned out to be my sister's second wedding, which they funded entirely. That was a breaking point for me. Therapy wasn't something I ever thought I'd try, but by my mid-20s, I was desperate for answers. Why did I feel like I had to earn my parents' love? Why did they treat me like I didn't belong? Therapy opened my eyes to a lot of things I hadn't wanted to admit. My parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was manipulative. They used it to control me, keeping me on edge and always trying to prove myself. For the first time, I started setting boundaries, and let me tell you, they did not like that. The real catalyst for change came at a family reunion a couple of years ago. I was sitting in the kitchen when I overheard my siblings mocking me. They were laughing about my career and my sad little apartment, as they called it. The worst part? My parents were laughing right along with them. I don't know why it surprised me, it wasn't the first time they'd made me feel small. But hearing it like that, out in the open, broke something in me. I confronted them right there. I told them I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter, tired of their constant dismissal of my feelings. They looked at me like I was speaking another language. My dad called me dramatic. My mom said I should stop being so ungrateful. That was it for me. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, always hoping they'd suddenly start treating me differently. Cutting ties wasn't easy. My parents acted shocked, like they couldn't believe I'd actually stand up for myself. My siblings called me selfish. But for the first time, I didn't care. I stopped answering their calls, stopped showing up for family events. Instead, I poured my energy into myself. I started focusing on my career, spending more time with friends, and figuring out what I actually wanted out of life. It was during this time that I started building my own version of a family. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, who celebrated my wins and supported me when I was struggling. When I got a promotion at work, a big one that I'd been working toward for years, they threw me a surprise party. It was the first time in my life I'd felt truly celebrated. My biological family didn't even acknowledge it. That just confirmed what I already knew. I'd made the right decision. One of the best moments came on my birthday last year. My friends surprised me with a cake and decorations, something my family had never done. It wasn't about the gifts or the party itself, it was about feeling seen and valued. I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I could build a life where I was the priority. A few weeks later, I decided to share my story online. I'd spent so long feeling like I was alone in this, like there was something wrong with me for wanting more. But reading other people's stories had helped me so much, and I wanted to do the same for someone else. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own experiences, offered advice, and reminded me that it's okay to walk away from toxic relationships, even if those relationships are with your family. I'm not going to lie and say everything's perfect now, but for the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my life. Cutting ties with my family was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I've ever made. I'm finally free to be myself, without the weight of their expectations holding me back. Update 1. After sharing my story on Reddit, I was blown away by the response. I had expected a few comments, maybe some kind words, but the post took off. People flooded the comments with support, sharing their own experiences with toxic families and reminding me that I wasn't alone. Some thanked me for putting into words what they'd felt for years. Others offered advice or just validated what I'd been through. Reading their encouragement lit a fire in me. For the first time, I truly felt like I wasn't crazy for walking away from my family. Not long after, something incredible happened. I got a job offer that completely changed my life. It was for a position I had applied to months ago, one I didn't think I'd get, because the competition was so fierce. When I saw the offer, I almost didn't believe it. The salary was double what I was making, the benefits were amazing, and the role was exactly what I'd been dreaming of. Accepting it felt like stepping into a new chapter. News of my new job somehow made its way back to my parents. I'm not sure if it was through a distant relative or some mutual acquaintance, but one day, I got a text from my mom, "Congrats on the new job. We're proud of you." Short, dry, and about as warm as a slab of concrete. A few hours later, my sister texted me too, but her message was less about congratulations and more about making fun of me. "Hope you don't forget where you came from," she wrote, followed by a joke about how I must think I'm better than everyone now. My brother chimed in with a similar tone, accusing me of showing off and saying I should stay humble. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. I wondered if cutting ties had been too harsh, if maybe I'd misjudged them. But during my next therapy session, I brought it up, and my therapist reminded me of all the reasons I'd made this decision. It wasn't about punishing them, it was about protecting myself. That reminder kept me focused on what really mattered, building the life I deserved. The financial freedom from my new job opened up possibilities I'd never had before. I paid off my student loans, started a savings account, and for the first time ever, I booked a solo vacation. I'd always dreamed of traveling alone but could never afford it. Spending a week exploring a new city, doing exactly what I wanted, was everything I hoped it would be. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost in years of trying to please others. others. Of course, the peace didn't last long. My sister started texting me out of the blue, saying how much she missed me. At first, I thought maybe she was sincere, but it didn't take long for the requests to start. "Can you help me out with rent this month?" she asked casually, like we'd never had any issues. When I told her I couldn't, the tone shifted. Suddenly, I was selfish and forgetting my family obligations. She dragged my parents into it too, claiming they were struggling and that it was my responsibility to step in. Then my brother jumped on the bandwagon. His messages were filled with passive-aggressive digs, implying that I thought I was too good for the family now. It was exhausting, but I refused to let them pull me back into their drama. Instead, I leaned on my chosen family, my friends, coworkers, and the online community that had been so supportive. They reminded me that I didn't owe my biological family anything. Around this time, I started posting more on social media about my life. I wasn't trying to show off. I just wanted to document the journey I was on. Pictures from my vacation, milestones at work, little moments of joy with friends. To my surprise, people started following along, drawn to the positivity and growth I was sharing. But apparently, my parents were keeping tabs too. One day I got a call from my mom, accusing me of rubbing my success in their faces. She said it wasn't fair to post things like that when my siblings were struggling. That's when I realized they'd been stalking my posts. I blocked them immediately. Then I made a public post about the importance of boundaries and why I decided to distance myself from toxic family members. It wasn't aimed at them directly, but I knew they'd hear about it. The reaction was mixed. Some extended family members reached out to say they understood and supported me, while others criticized me for abandoning my parents. I let them say what they wanted. Their opinions didn't matter anymore. One breakthrough came during a particularly emotional therapy session. My therapist asked me to think about all the times I tried to be the perfect daughter and what it had cost me. For the first time, I let myself forgive the version of me that had chased their approval for so long. That moment felt like shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. By the end of it all, something shifted. I wasn't just surviving without my family, I was thriving. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering what they thought of me. I wasn't chasing their validation anymore. I was free. Update 2. After weeks of peace, I thought the chaos of my family had finally settled. One evening, as I was unwinding after work, there was an unexpected knock on my apartment door. Peering through the peephole, I was startled to see my mother standing there, tears streaming down her face. Hesitant but curious, I opened the door. She immediately rushed in, pleading for me to come back to the family. She began talking about how much everyone missed me, but the conversation quickly shifted. She started listing all the ways I had hurt them by distancing myself. It felt like a barrage of guilt tripping, with her reminding me of every supposed sacrifice they had made for me. She accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, turning the entire situation around as if I was the one who had wronged them. I took a deep breath, staying as calm as possible. I explained that my decision to step back was not made lightly and reminded her of the years of unequal treatment and neglect. I told her that I needed to prioritize my well-being. She tried to interrupt, but I stood my ground, refusing to engage in an argument. Eventually, realizing I wasn't going to relent, she left in a huff, still murmuring about how I was tearing the family apart. A few days later, a mutual friend reached out with some surprising news. Apparently, my sister had been telling people that I was financially supporting her. She was using this lie to maintain appearances, making it seem like we were close and that she was doing well thanks to my help. It was baffling, especially since we hadn't spoken in months. Our friend confronted her about the lie, and things escalated quickly. Word spread among our social circles, and people began questioning her integrity. The facade she had carefully built started to crumble, causing quite a bit of drama. I chose not to involve myself, preferring to let the truth reveal itself without my intervention. Meanwhile, positive things were happening in my life. At work, I received a prestigious award for leading a successful project. It was a significant recognition, and my colleagues were genuinely happy for me. My friends, the family I had chosen, organized a celebration. We gathered at my favorite restaurant, laughing and enjoying each other's company. It was a stark contrast to the negativity I'd left behind. But my family's attempts to reel me back in weren't over. I received an email from my parents with the subject line "Family Matters" in it. They demanded that I fix the family or they would cut me out of their will. They accused me of being the source of all the discord and warned that I was making a grave mistake. The ultimatum felt like another manipulation tactic. Curious about their threat, I did some discreet checking. It turned out that my parents had been exaggerating their wealth for years. There wasn't much to inherit, they had accumulated debt rather than assets. Their supposed fortune was just another illusion. Realizing this, their ultimatum lost all its power over me. Around this time, some of my extended family began reaching out. To my surprise, a few cousins shared their own stories of experiencing favoritism and neglect within the family. They empathized with my situation and offered support. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, and together we started forming stronger bonds, separate from the toxic dynamics we'd grown up with. My story began gaining traction online. People resonated with my journey of setting boundaries and taking control of my life. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for sharing and expressing how it had inspired them to make positive changes in their own lives. It was heartening to see something good come out of my experiences. Out of nowhere, my siblings started sending me gifts and messages filled with apologies. They wrote about wanting to mend our relationships and move forward. However, given everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel suspicious of their sudden change of heart. It seemed too convenient, and I wondered if they had ulterior motives. On a brighter note, I met someone special during a volunteer event. We connected over shared interests and values. He admired my independence and understood the importance of boundaries. As we spent more time together, our relationship blossomed into something meaningful. It was refreshing to be with someone who respected my journey and supported my choices. Then came news that my father had a health scare. My family reached out, emphasizing how much they needed me during this difficult time. They suggested that I should take on caregiver duties, implying it was my responsibility. While I was concerned about his health, I knew that stepping back into that environment wasn't healthy for me. I responded by suggesting they hire professional help, pointing out that it would ensure he received proper care. This decision marked a significant moment for me. I realized I could care about their well-being without sacrificing my own peace of mind. Saying no without feeling guilty was a major step in my healing process. Life continued to move forward. I focused on nurturing my relationships, excelling at work, and investing time in hobbies that brought me joy. The more I built a life that reflected who I truly was, the less their attempts to pull me back affected me. One day, I looked back and noticed that the weight I'd been carrying had lessened. I no longer felt the constant tug of guilt or obligation. I was living life on my own terms, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me. The emotional breakthrough was subtle but profound. I realized I felt no guilt about my decisions anymore. By choosing myself, I had opened the door to genuine happiness and fulfillment. The past still existed, but it no longer dictated my present or future. I was free. Update 3. Things had been quiet for a while, almost too quiet. I was thriving in my new role at work, enjoying my life, and making strides both personally and professionally. But as I learned with my family, peace never lasted long. It started with an unexpected email from my HR department. The subject line alone sent a chill down my spine. Urgent allegations of misconduct. I opened it, confused and uneasy. HR informed me that they had received multiple anonymous complaints accusing me of unethical behavior, everything from falsifying numbers to inappropriate conduct with colleagues. I stared at the email, stunned. None of it made sense. A meeting with HR was scheduled immediately, and while I knew I had done nothing wrong, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to ruin me. During the meeting, my manager and HR went over the details of the complaints. I calmly addressed every accusation, confident in my spotless record. I had receipts for everything, project logs, emails, even timestamps. It didn't take long for HR to see the complaints were baseless. I cleared my name completely. But that wasn't the end. It traced the anonymous emails, and what they discovered shocked me. The complaints had come from an IP address linked to my brother's location. My own brother had tried to sabotage me at work. I was livid. I hadn't spoken to him in months, yet this was how far he was willing to go. I decided to confront them. I sent a group message to my parents and siblings, laying out the evidence. I didn't accuse them outright, but I made it clear I knew where the complaints came from. Instead of taking responsibility, they turned the tables. My brother denied everything, calling me paranoid. My sister chimed in, claiming I was trying to tear the family apart with lies. My parents accused me of being obsessed with hurting them. That was the final straw. I blocked every single one of them, on my phone, email, and social media. I wasn't going to let them keep pulling me into their chaos. I even changed my number to make sure they had no way of contacting me. A week later, my sister showed up at my workplace. I saw her through the glass entrance as she tried to sweet-talk the receptionist into letting her in. I alerted security, who escorted her out of the building. She didn't put up a fight, but I knew she wasn't done yet. That same day, I called a lawyer to discuss my options. If they continued harassing me, I was fully prepared to file a restraining order. I had reached my limit. I shared what was happening on Reddit, and the support I received was overwhelming. People reassured me that I was doing the right thing, gave advice on how to protect myself legally, and even shared similar stories of family members crossing boundaries. Knowing I wasn't alone helped me keep my head up. Despite the drama, life kept moving forward. Just a month after the investigation, I received another major promotion, this time to a leadership role. It was a huge step in my career, and it came with recognition from the higher-ups. My chosen family celebrated with me that night. We toasted to success, growth, and freedom. Of course, word of my promotion made its way back to my extended family. Suddenly, rumors started circulating that I had abandoned my parents in their old age. Distant relatives sent passive-aggressive messages, asking why I wasn't helping my poor parents who had done so much for me. I didn't engage with them. Let them talk, I thought. Instead, I decided to write. I penned an anonymous article about toxic families, sharing my story without naming names. It was raw and honest, describing the challenges of setting boundaries and the guilt that comes with breaking free. The article struck a nerve, going viral almost overnight. People related to it deeply. Some praised me for being strong, others shared their own struggles. It sparked an important discussion, and I felt proud that my story could help others. That's when the next desperate attempt arrived, this time in the form of a handwritten letter from my parents. The letter was dripping with emotion. They claimed they were too old to fight and begged me to come back before it's too late. It was manipulative, filled with carefully chosen words designed to pull at my heartstrings. I didn't fall for it. I responded with a short, polite letter restating my boundaries. I told them I wished them well, but I wasn't going to engage any further. Around this time, karma finally caught up to my siblings. My brother was arrested for fraud, completely unrelated to me. The news spread quickly, and suddenly the golden child wasn't so golden anymore. My sister, meanwhile, started blaming me for her financial struggles. She told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her in her time of need. I didn't let it slide. My lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter, warning her to stop spreading false claims. That shut her up quickly. After everything, the noise finally stopped. The harassment, the lies, the manipulation, it all came to a halt. I had taken back control of my life, and this time I wasn't letting it go. My career was thriving. My friendships were stronger than ever, and I had peace for the first time in years. I realized that, no matter how hard they tried to pull me back, I had built something they couldn't touch, a life that was mine and mine alone. Update 4. After everything with my family finally settled down, I found myself with the kind of peace and freedom I'd only dreamed of before. I wanted to use this new chapter in my life to give back. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter where I worked with survivors of abuse and toxic relationships. Their resilience inspired me, and it felt good to contribute to something bigger than myself. I also began donating a portion of my income to causes I cared about, like education initiatives and mental health programs. Giving back became a cornerstone of this new life I was building. At work, my leadership role gave me opportunities to mentor younger women entering the industry. I took this seriously, making time to share my experiences, not just about career growth, but also about recognizing and setting boundaries in all aspects of life. I saw myself in some of them, eager to prove their worth, often at the expense of their own well-being. Watching them succeed felt like a victory of my own. Meanwhile, my chosen family continued to grow. That Thanksgiving, I decided to host my first Friendsgiving. My apartment was small, but we made it work. Everyone brought a dish, and we spent the evening laughing, sharing stories, and expressing gratitude for each other. At one point, as I looked around the room, it hit me, I had created this. This was my family now, one that I'd chosen, and one that chose me back. But just as I was settling into this new sense of belonging, the drama from my biological family reared its head again. Through the grapevine, I heard that my parents had sold their house. Years of financial mismanagement had finally caught up to them. My siblings were furious, not because they cared about the house itself, but because they were now scrambling to figure out where to live. Naturally, they decided I should help. The first message came from my sister, asking if I could lend her money for a new place. When I didn't respond, she escalated. She posted publicly on Facebook, calling me heartless and accusing me of abandoning the family in their time of need. The comments from her friends and a few distant relatives were full of judgment. I forwarded the post to my lawyer, who immediately sent her a formal cease and desist notice. That shut things down quickly. In therapy, I worked through the lingering guilt this stirred up. My therapist reminded me of something I had come to understand, but needed to hear again. I was not responsible for my family's failures. Their financial struggles, their poor choices, none of it was my burden to carry. This realization felt like closing the door on years of self-doubt and misplaced responsibility. Around this time, something wonderful happened. My partner, who had been a steady source of support and encouragement, proposed. It wasn't a grand, over-the-top gesture, just the two of us in a quiet moment, filled with love and certainty. I said yes. We began planning a small, intimate wedding with only our closest friends. Of course, news of the engagement eventually made its way to my family, and the outrage was swift. My sister sent me a string of angry texts, accusing me of excluding them and calling the wedding a slap in the face to the people who raised you. I didn't respond. My wedding wasn't about them, and I refused to let them turn it into another spectacle. To avoid further drama, I quietly deactivated my public social media accounts. I didn't need their prying eyes on my life anymore. I kept a private profile for close friends and focused on being present in my offline world. It was one of the best decisions I'd made. My career continued to thrive. I was invited to speak at a conference about overcoming adversity in the workplace. Standing in front of that audience, I shared my journey, not just the professional milestones, but the personal growth that had shaped who I was. Afterward, attendees came up to thank me for my honesty, sharing how my story resonated with their own struggles. Knowing I had made an impact was incredibly fulfilling. But my family wasn't done yet. One morning, I woke up to an email from my mother. The subject line read, "Our final wish." In the email, she claimed she and my father were on their deathbed and begged me to reconcile before it was too late. The timing was suspicious, given I just heard from a cousin that they were perfectly fine. It was another manipulation attempt, designed to guilt me into breaking the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. I brought the email to my next therapy session. My therapist and I discussed it, and I came to a decision I wasn't going to respond. Engaging would only pull me back into their cycle of control and guilt. Recognizing the manipulation for what it was felt like another step forward in my healing. A few weeks later, a former colleague shared my story anonymously in an industry blog. The response was incredible. Messages poured in from people who saw themselves in my journey, praising my strength and resilience. It reminded me how far I had come and how much I had to be proud of. Finally, I took a big step. I bought my first home. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of breaking the generational cycles that had defined my family for so long. Standing in my new kitchen, surrounded by my chosen family as we celebrated, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was the life I had fought for, and it was mine. Update 5. It's been a year since I moved into my new home, and looking back, I can hardly believe how much my life has changed. My first year here has been filled with laughter, growth, and milestones that I never thought possible. To celebrate, my chosen family, my friends and loved ones who have stood by me, organized a dinner party. We gathered in the backyard, under strings of fairy lights, sharing stories and toasting to new beginnings. There was no tension, no guilt, no walking on eggshells. It was everything I once hoped family gatherings could be. Professionally, I've hit another milestone. I launched my own consulting business. After years of working in corporate environments, I wanted the freedom to set my own schedule and work on projects that truly mattered to me. The business has taken off faster than I expected, allowing me to achieve a level of financial independence and flexibility I've only dreamed of. My days are now filled with purpose, and for the first time in years, work feels more like passion than obligation. What surprised me most, though, is how little I think about my biological family now. Months have gone by without them crossing my mind. There's no more gnawing sense of guilt or wondering what they might be saying about me. In therapy, I've spent time reflecting on how far I've come. During one session, my therapist pointed out something that stuck with me. I've moved from survival mode to thriving. Letting go of resentment wasn't easy, but it's freed me in ways I can't even begin to describe. Through mutual acquaintances, I've heard bits and pieces about my siblings. Both of them are struggling financially, and apparently they've turned their anger toward my parents, blaming them for not providing more support. It's ironic, given how they were always the favored ones. When I heard this, I didn't feel the pull to step in or help. I've made my peace with the fact that their struggles aren't my responsibility. It's a lesson that took years to learn, but it's one I'm grateful for. Meanwhile, my consulting business has started gaining media attention. I was recently featured in an article about empowering women in the workplace. The piece highlighted my journey and how I've used my experiences to help others. The recognition felt surreal but meaningful. It's a reminder that even the hardest parts of my past can be transformed into something positive. On the personal front, my relationship has only grown stronger. My partner and I have started planning for the future, talking about starting a family of our own someday. We've had long conversations about the kind of parents we want to be and how we'll avoid repeating the toxic patterns we grew up with. It feels good to build a life with someone who shares my values and supports my boundaries. Even my extended family seems to have taken the hint. After months of silence, it's clear they've realized I won't cave to guilt or manipulation. The calls and messages have stopped, and with them, so has the drama. The distance has been a gift, allowing me to focus fully on the life I've built. One of the most rewarding things I've done recently is starting a podcast. Each episode, I share advice and stories about overcoming toxic family dynamics, setting boundaries, and thriving independently. The response has been incredible. Listeners have reached out to say how much they've related to my experiences and how the podcast has helped them in their own lives. Knowing that my story can make a difference for others has been one of the most fulfilling parts of this journey. Holidays, once a source of dread, have become something to look forward to. Last Christmas, I started a new tradition with my chosen family. We cooked a huge meal, exchanged gifts, and spent the day watching movies and playing games. It was joyful and stress-free, completely free of the guilt and tension I used to associate with the season. We've already started planning for this year, and I couldn't be more excited. In this new chapter of my life, I've also prioritized my health and wellness. I've taken up yoga and meditation, which have become daily practices. Both have helped me find balance and stay grounded, even when life gets hectic. I've discovered a version of myself that's calm, centered, and content. A few weeks ago, I received an unexpected email from my father. It was short and simple, apologizing for the way he treated me in the past. While it might have been genuine, I chose not to respond. I've come to understand that an apology doesn't erase years of harm, nor does it obligate me to reopen doors I've intentionally closed. That chapter of my life is over, and I'm at peace with that. Recently, I shared one final post on Reddit. In it, I thanked the community for their unwavering support and encouragement over the years. I wrote about how setting boundaries had changed my life and how I've built something beautiful in the absence of toxic relationships. The comments were filled with kindness and understanding, reminding me of the strength that comes from shared experiences. As I sit here, reflecting on everything, I realize how far I've come. I'm living a life that's full of love, success, and peace. I've learned that you don't need anyone else's approval to be happy. You just need to prioritize yourself. In the end, I've become the golden child of my own life, and I wouldn't have it any other way.